Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Cloudbusters. I'm Alex Huller, and I'm joined by my co-host, as ever, Mallory Vadreau. This week, we're going to be digging into cloud for enterprise and hybrid cloud and the challenges that we need to be managing as we're shifting from on-premise into public cloud.
So we're going to start today by talking about, what is hybrid? What is it actually? Which is a surprisingly controversial question. Then we'll talk a little bit about, is hybrid desirable, right? Do you want that, or is it a natural result of other activities within the enterprise? And then we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts about what you do with your on-prem spend, with your data center spend, right? It doesn't just disappear after a migration. And joining us today to share some of his thoughts is Ryan Hughes, who is the VP of Cloud Solutions at Nationwide Insurance, and also the host of All Cloud No Breaks, the podcast. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, excited to be here.
Absolutely. And you can hear everyone from his accent. He is joining us from across the pond and getting up early. So thank you for that. Let's get to it, team. Let's talk. What is hybrid? Discuss.
There are many definitions, and I think everyone would admit there's many definitions of a hybrid. For us in a Fortune 100 company, hybrid is something that is unavoidable from a multi-cloud provider perspective. But there's other pieces and other definitions of hybrid that we necessarily don't adopt or don't subscribe to, or just don't implement from a strategy perspective too. So I don't know if we're going to hit all of them by definition. I don't know if we want to necessarily bore everyone with that. But to me, there's the unavoidable. You are going to have to manage and deal with and have contracts with and relationships with multiple cloud providers, because basically every software company in the industry, they don't make boxes anymore for the most part. They're either turning into SaaS companies or they're turning into infrastructure plus software providers, in that PaaS value layer, or they become hyperscaler clouds themselves. You see this from the hard, everyone from, traditional hardware providers like HP and Dell have offerings all the way through, the Microsofts and the Amazons and the Googles that are out there. So, from our perspective, we know that we're going to, because of purpose-built decisions we've made from technology, we're going to be in all of these clouds at some way, shape, or form. Now, how much we put in and what services we use, we can definitely discuss that. But what we haven't implemented is some people's definition of hybrid is on-premise plus cloud with this layer, this control panel between it. And it doesn't matter to the developer whether you're on-premise or whether you're in the cloud, they had the same experience. And, who cares where my server lands and who cares where my data lands? It's whoever's offering the cheapest price that day. Like that vision that was kind of painted way back probably in like 2008 or 2010 with, some old Gartner papers or NIST and FedRAMP certification studies and things like that have come out. The CSA, I think, coined some of those terms around hybrid and cloud brokering. They've just never really come true, and they actually just don't make sense for most enterprises out there due to trying to take advantage of the built-in capabilities and built-in functions of the hyperscale cloud providers that are out there. If you boil everything down to the least common denominator, so you can put a third-party panel in front of it, it's really hard to take control and take advantage of some of those native capabilities that you went to the public cloud in the first place for.
I mean, Ryan, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I remember that vision, the whole, okay, this is going to be our hybrid workload. I've got my baseline kind of infrastructure in my data center that I've already got. I can run it super cheap. And then when I need that extra, I don't have to go buy that extra server storage, bandwidth, whatever it is. I can just burst out to the cloud provider for that peak and then drop it back to my baseline earlier. It sounded fantastic. But I feel like that definition has pretty much, as you say, it's evaporated. And now we see hybrid is, we're using multiple cloud providers, so we're hybrid. Or I just happen to have some things on premise and some other things that are completely separate and disconnected in the public cloud on public cloud providers, and I'm hybrid. And it's kind of, I feel like, would you agree? It sounds like that is now what that definition means, because that vision that we were kind of sold hasn't materialized. And I feel like you were touching on a couple of good reasons for it there. I mean, I know that we like the idea because it was like, okay, it's a great way to combat vendor lock-in. But I mean, do you get concerned about that with what you're doing at the moment? Or is that actually not really an issue?
We're always locked in to everything at all times, at all levels of technology. I mean, you have to make choices. You have to make, vendor or technology choices at your database level. You have to have, middleware solutions, whether it be open source or proprietary. You have to make code language choices, OS choices, and in an enterprise setting, most of those come with contracts that are not 1 day or 1 month in duration. They're usually 3 to 5 years of commitment on those choices, and some of it is actually a good thing, because if you think about, hey, we're going to reevaluate a middleware technology that we're going to use, and we've decided to go with something proprietary. I'm making this up. This is far from the truth, obviously, but by the time we evaluate it and we sign a contract and we implement it and roll it out, to our 5,000 IT employees and 3,000 plus developers that are out there, and they start using it and getting value out of it, it is 3 to 5 years. And so, everyone says, well, sign shorter contracts and get it on a subscription basis so you can go up and down and all that kind of. And it's like, well, if you want the best price and you want to roll it out at scale and you want to gain value out of it, it does take that 3 to 5 year life cycle in large companies like ourselves. With that said, we're trying more and more to adopt subscription models that do allow us to go up and down and allow us to consume technology at the pace that it's being developed, which means that, hey, in 18 months, if you look at the container landscape, in the last 18 months, the container and the CNCF landscape is changed greatly. Like, the top 100 artifacts that are in there have, basically completely flipped over in that time frame. And new vendors are on the scene, new management capabilities. Some of even the orchestration languages that had some steam in the past have been just eaten up by, Kubernetes is basically the only choice at this point. So, things do change in, less than 3 to 5 years. And so it's really trying to find that balance between adoption and value and rolling things out and providing that consistent message to, again, thousands of technology professionals that work in your organization of, this is the way we're going, this is the way we want you to go, and not making them navigate, changes too often that would be a distraction. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of work to do on top of, public cloud already. Trying to actually engineer a solution that connects everything together, and provides that abstraction layer and that ubiquitous layer that makes on-prem look like cloud, just it isn't really differentiated work in my opinion. You can do it, and people have been successful doing it. And it's not like it's bad. It's just that you have to make the decision if that's what you want to do. You can't be half in or half out, because like you said, you're going to have a team around it. You're going to have skill sets around it. You're going to have to reinvest in on-premise technology and not even reinvest, but you're going to have to update and upgrade. You can't just run it off like the way that most companies that are migrating aggressively to cloud are doing today. Trying to sweat assets 7, 8, 9 years of servers in the data centers, and virtualize the heck out of them in order to get as much value as possible, so they don't have to go buy new equipment. If you have a hybrid, if hybrid means to you that you're going to, continue to invest in on-premise and invest in that layer, you're going to have significant costs, especially in labor and skills in that area, because those skills you're talking about are not cheap. You're talking about people that have to know on-prem, people that have to know public cloud, which is hard enough to find one or the other. Someone that knows both and can paint a vision, with code and in a way that, again, thousands of technology associates in a company can utilize is really tough.
Okay, so Ryan, when you're thinking about actually, okay, this is what we're going to be moving to public cloud, and we're providing the right guardrails and tools. Do you when you approach this, are you looking at like each individual workload, and I'm going to build a business case and evaluate, do or I want to move that? Or is it have you gone from the other approach of, okay, we know we're going to cloud for everything, so we don't need to do that kind of detail activity, or we do, and we do it in a slightly different way? How do you guys approach that?
It's a great question, and our approach has changed over time. A couple of years ago, we wanted to get to cloud and wanted to get there fast, and we wanted to get out of a couple of our data centers also. In order to do that, we did more of a volunteer approach. So we took the willing and the able, and partnered them with with experts in cloud, because you do have to, in order to gain some efficiency and some value, lift and shift isn't really a thing. People talk about lift and shift, but like even if you are trying to do nothing and just lift and shift into the cloud, you still have to do quite a bit, a couple days or a couple weeks of work in order just to adopt new images and get the right credentials and least privilege access and all just the blocking and tackling that you have to do even just to get into cloud. We've decided to go a step further than that. Most of our migrations are more on, if you follow the 6 R's of migration, more on like the re-platform, not quite all the way to refactoring or re-architecting, but more re-platforming, where we're removing proprietary middleware solutions. We're trying to move to open source wherever we can, whether that be the database layer or the web server layer, whatever that may be. And we're making sure that we're checking also third-party proprietary licensing too. So, hey, if you're moving a business application that, you've bought from company XYZ and it's in the licensing schema is, typical per CPU, and, on premise, you can say, hey, I'm going to put it on this server. And, for 4 CPUs, I bought this, $20,000 a license, whatever it is. And then you take it to cloud where you can dictate the number of CPUs, but it's not necessarily, if it's a legacy license, it's not necessarily made and thinks about, like you were talking about earlier, like bursting or auto scaling or anything like that. Those are some of the things that slow down migrations. Okay, now we're into a legal and procurement process where we have to go back and talk to that vendor. Usually that vendor is, we found we're in a better spot now in, 2021 than what we were in 2018, where some vendors were really dragging their feet because they were making, money on maintenance and perpetual licensing and all that kind of stuff. Most vendors have now said, okay, we get it. It's a lease subscription licensing if we're still going to deliver you a box or a packaged software. Most of them, if they're a modern, want to survive type company, are moving into software as a service themselves, or at least some kind of marketplace offering that makes it easier to deploy. So the market is moving in that way, but not everything's like that. So yes, you have to check every single application, or you can do a good job moving 19 out of 20 applications and they all work out fine financially, architecturally, whatever it may be. And then you can mess up one and erase all your financial gains, all your, all your security, because like the impact could be huge, putting proprietary software licensing into an auto scale policy that all of a sudden, you owe $180,000 to the vendor that month. Like, okay, well, that was a big mistake because we didn't check. We didn't know any better. So that's an extreme scenario, but we do find that we do try to prevent those kind of mistakes going in. So we run every application through a process we call cloud diagnostics, which has, 4 pillars similar to other, health checks that you've seen out there. Well architected. I think AWS has one called well architected. It's just, 4 pillars around economics, security, architecture, and then operating model. Everyone talks about agility and DevOps and, pipelines and automation. Well, when you have 2,500 applications in your portfolio, like a large enterprise does, let me tell you, all of them aren't necessarily the crown jewels that you need that you're able to invest your top talent or, develop and maintain a pipeline around. Or some of these systems just need to like get out there and run and, monitor and don't go down. So like, you have to pick your battles on what you're really going to invest in from a portfolio standpoint. And that's probably the hardest decision and decision criteria that we have to come up with, because there is part of the process that is kind of telling teams or people or apps that, hey, you don't really matter that much.
Whoa.
Like, it's just, it's, what's your business value? What's the value to your business? And like, hey, I'd like to take this to serverless and I want to re-architect it. And, it's going to be hundreds or thousands of hours, which is, in our world, it's money. Mm-hmm. And it's, if not money, at least prioritization value, because we could be doing that for another app. And it's like, hey, I hear you. And like, I want to do that too, but like, this isn't the app for that. Like, let's go find another one to invest.
Ryan, you hinted at this, but the idea of like, it only takes one application to make a mistake sort of thing. Like, there are some applications that don't love being in cloud, right? And I think we've all seen those before. There are just some that are really difficult to get right in cloud. which means that loads and loads of organizations are not getting it right the first time, or they're bringing in consultants and experts to make sure that they get it right. And like, it is so easy to have a really smooth migration, and then boom, a business critical but kind of grumpy application, for lack of a better term, gets into cloud and just completely interrupts the flow and makes you almost do like a rip stop to say, okay, we need to fix this. Otherwise, we're going to be completely off budget.
Yeah, I mean, we run a multi-million-dollar program in order to fund the expertise for these app teams to be able to get into cloud and get into the cloud correctly. The last thing we want to do is put them in a bad spot, even if they're in a bad spot already on premise. Like, we don't want to recreate that in cloud, right? It's not like, well, you really earned this app really stinks on premise, and so it's really going to stink in the cloud. Like, no, you can't do this. This is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to make things better, right? But there is a line that you have to have some kind of criteria to say, okay, we're going to make things better and we're going to get it to a certain spot. But if this application is more of a run the business application and not a drive value and drive, financial profit kind of application, there's a line that you need to draw to say, okay, enough's enough. It's good enough. Let's move on to something that does generate revenue.
That's interesting, Ryan. I'm wondering now, because I appreciate, depending on the type of application, is it critical or not? It sounds like there are going to be different kind of definitions of success, for these different types of workloads. So can I ask, what are the kind of the important success metrics that you found, kind of when you're not only communicating to the application owners that we're trying to help migrate, but actually then to the wider management team who are interested in what's going on in this cloud migration and what benefit we're getting for it? What do you think of, or what do you track as kind of the most important benefits here?
Well, I can tell you, as being part of a Fortune 100 enterprise in a very competitive, insurance and financial services market, the number one thing we track is economics. And I use the term economics and not cost, because economics it also has a meter of value in it. So again, back to the value in the portfolio, we probably have, out of the 2,500 applications we probably have a couple hundred that really drive the business, whether it be customer adoption or market capture or, revenue or, making trades, whatever it may be, across our landscape. And then we have other supporting applications, that are important, that, believe me, if they go down, like, someone's going to notice, so if you kind of think of it just as the top 20% of applications in the portfolio, those are the ones you really wouldn't need to go all out, all investment, DevOps, cloud native, all that kind of stuff. And then you have a portion of your portfolio, probably 30 to 40 to 50% of the rest of it, that is, run the business. They're important and they're probably business critical, but they don't need to be agile. They don't necessarily need to release every day and have new features and functions that, are customer facing. And then you have a portion of your portfolio that I lovingly refer to as crap applications. And, the crap applications, that's what they are. And they should, in many organizations, they don't know that they're crap applications. And, my job and our job, as we go through diagnosis, is to make sure that they're not overvalued and we don't overinvest in that part of the portfolio, because they're important to someone and someone loves them, I'm sure, out there, but they don't necessarily deserve our investment as they migrate to cloud. And this is our chance to make sure that we get them in a state that is, you asked about what we look at. We look at economics, but we also, we want them to be secure. Security is, I say economics is the first thing we look at, but really security, we know is job zero for all of this.
That's awesome. So actually, think about this, we don't have to do too much thinking about the long list of things we want to migrate, because if we've got these golden templates, we've got these standard processes that, let's face it, you said we couldn't do that on-prem. Mm-hmm. We now have a fairly safe, kind of guaranteed way to get that started. That's pretty awesome.
The only thing I'll say is that, and you guys have been around enterprises as well, everyone's special. Like every application, so like every, so you say like, we don't have to think too hard about which applications to move. And oh yes, we do. We overthink it all day long. And so does every other app, company out there, because of little scenarios and little, oh, but this and that, and the relationship with here. And, so there's a ton of moving pieces.
So well, let's talk about that bubble a little bit, right? Like you're migrating things out of a data center that you own and you can depreciate into cloud. You still have these pieces of tin somewhere in the world, presumably, right? Like what happens next with all of these boxes that you're not using anymore?
Well, I mean, they have an end of life already, so I mean, most organizations have a staggered approach to their equipment already, right? Not all of their equipment is exactly 5 years old on the same day. Like, it wasn't refreshed on the same day. It's usually, every year you're refreshing like a fifth or a fourth of your environment. And so, over time, we've started to slow down that refresh, and we've tried to, a couple of years ago, our goal was to stop the on-premise growth. So like we wanted to not provision any more hardware on premise, and then you can start to reduce. But until you actually stop the growth, you can't say, okay, we've now stopped it, now we want it to go down the other way. And the funny thing is, if you think about it, a lot of people think of growth as like, okay, let's just put the new applications in the cloud. Well, there's organic growth as well as new growth. It's not just about like, putting everything new in cloud or migrating stuff. The applications, nothing stays still. The applications that are on premise, if you think about just the last 2 years, more people are using the internet than ever. And guess what will happen tomorrow? More people will be using the internet tomorrow than what's happening today, and so forth. So there's more and more pressure, more and more compute, more and more storage. Especially data storage, just keeps growing. People talk about life cycle management with data storage. Not very many companies do that very well. It's just more of a keep everything forever, because just in case kind of scenario. And so, everything's always growing, and therefore it costs more. And so really, 2 years into our cloud journey, stopping the on-premise growth was a huge monument that we celebrated before we actually saw last year that we were reducing the amount of on-prem growth. And so during that time, of course, like our public cloud spend is going up. And so you start to ask yourself like, hey, in the first 2 years you spent in public cloud, but all you were doing was stopping on-prem growth. And like, there's your bubble, right? Like you're still coming up this way, even though this is coming up. And, so to be able to, in the third year, really say, okay, now we're starting to go down the hill on premise and we're starting to see reductions. Now we can start to, Mallory, to your question, what are we going to do with the extra servers? Well, the first 2 years of cloud migration, it's not about what to do with the extra servers, because there are no extra servers, because you're still growing for other reasons than cloud migration. And then, as you get above that, hopefully the attrition of the servers that are in the racks are attriting out at the same pace that you're going to cloud. That's the goal. So you never have to buy another physical server. You get it into public cloud. You rent or lease or whatever you want to call the consume in public cloud, and not have to necessarily worry about that. But that's just on the compute side. The compute side is almost one of the more easy ones. I mean, the store, you talk about storage, and you talk about, network cost. Network cost looks more like stair steps than it does a bell curve, like the way that compute and storage looks. So there's different scenarios for different capabilities that you adopt.
It's the whole thing is like this ballroom dance of like there are so many different moving pieces, and somehow it all works. But it's like if you hyper focus on one thing, you're going to lose the rest of the context. And likewise, if you look at the whole context and the big picture, which, in your role, you have to, like, yeah, some details are going to slip through the cracks, and you're going to have some empty boxes sitting around. You're going to have some bubble, but you're trying to manage something much bigger than a little bit of extra capacity.
Well, and back to Alexander's question is around what do you measure? Well, you have to measure not just the economics, not just the security, not just the efficiency, but also the value that you're driving. And that can come in speed and agility. And so that's one of the harder things to measure, because there's so much that goes into, everyone talks about like release cycles and dev cycles, and just count the number of releases that your dev team's doing, and then you can chalk that advantage up to cloud. And it's like, well, it's not really that simple. I mean, a release cycle and is driven by so many more things than just the infrastructure being there or not being there. If it's going up, like that's great. I actually saw that AWS released some statistics the other day that was most enterprises find between 4x and 9x more agility and more release, more frequent releases in their teams that are using cloud as compared to on premise. And it's like, okay, like 4 to 9x, like you can't really argue with that. Like even if we're 2x or 3x, like we'll celebrate that. But most people are getting 4 to 9x. Yeah, there's probably some kind of correlation there. But when you just go app by app and you're measuring, how much speed are you delivering? There's other things that necessarily like the back end infrastructure, organization that I work in doesn't affect from a dev cycle, dev tooling, DevOps approach that they're doing out there in the business with their developers, that you can't necessarily chalk all the way up to cloud. But you do have to try to measure it, and hopefully you have good partnerships with your developer relations, executives that are measuring that out in the business.
Thank you, Ryan. That's actually been really awesome and really insightful. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. We have one last element to kind of close up on before we close out. And Mallory, I don't know if we gave you enough planning for this one or not. Did you have like a hybrid, a migrati hat of the week to share with us?
Okay, so a little trash talk before we get to the hat. So Ryan's in Ohio, and for those of you who don't know, I grew up in Michigan, which means that Ryan and I have to be rivals. We have to. So thank you for joining, but also we're fighting. And what I wanted to do was put like a Detroit Red Wings hat on or University of Michigan hat on, right? Just to troll him. I don't have any of that. I live in London. I didn't bring Michigan gear with me, right? So I decided to keep it classy, despite what I just said about, anyway, I decided to keep it classy. And I did find a hat that I think is a hybrid hat. Bear with me. I chose this hat because you see it is both a hat and a veil, so it is a hybrid.
Okay, all right, all right.
Oh boy. Thank you everyone for watching this episode of Cloudbusters. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can join our LinkedIn group. You can also email us at cloudbusters@apptio.com. And don't forget that Ryan is the host of All Cloud, No Breaks, the podcast. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. It was a great conversation, despite the fact that you're from Ohio. Everyone else, we'll see you at the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.